Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon. Guys, if you like this show, hit the subscribe, like, make comments, share with your friends, and join the Police Off the Cuff family. We are now covering more information in regards to the Kohberger case. Every day we thought this case was over. However, new information is coming out. In fact, I saved it for everyone, or I sent it to everyone in the chat. There is an outstanding article by The Independent, which verifies a lot of the information that we had months and months ago. And I'm going to go over that today. And they had some outstanding digital information that was such powerful information against Brian Kohberger. And what is baffling to me is when the prosecutor, Bill Thompson, was asked about it, he denied it even existed, specifically connections with the victims from 1122 King Road, specifically Kaylee Gonsalves and Madison Mogan. And we're learning now that that connection with the Mad Greek restaurant actually existed. And we're going to talk about how it existed. We're going to talk about the meanings of Brian Kohberger on the early mornings of the murders, turning his cell phone off at 02:45. That's 2:45 a.m. And then once the dirty deeds had been completed at 04:48 hours, turns his cell phone back on. And we'll get more into that as we realize he knew exactly what he was doing. And during that window, isn't that the window where most likely he got rid of all the evidence, the bloody clothing, the K-bar knife, and if there was a secondary weapon, got rid of that too. So all of these things he had worked on. This was so premeditated. He had done dry runs. He had done at least 23 recons to 1122 King Road. So we're going to get into that tonight. And we're going to see where, if we were the prosecutors, where would we have started with this case? Because according to Matt Murphy, that great Orange County, California prosecutor, he said the evidence in this case was overwhelming. So we're going to get into this. I'm excited about tonight. We're going to get into this. So folks, hold on to your hats. Hold on to your loved ones. Hold on to your service dog. Hold on to your cup of coffee, your glass of wine. You're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off the cuff zone. The police off the cuff zone. There has to be some common sense.
They were the ones who called 911 to get him help, and now they're calling for change.
And now a word from our sponsor. FanDuel is a new sponsor through the Believe Network for Police Off the Cuff. FanDuel is a legal and regulated online sports betting platform operating in the United States. It allows users to bet real money on the outcomes of sport events across major leagues, such as the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, NHL, and more. FanDuel offers daily fantasy sports and online casino games in certain states. What FanDuel offers? Sportsbook. Bet on sports games and player props. Daily fantasy sports. Draft a lineup, salary cap, and win based on player performance. Casino, online slots, blackjack, roulette, etc. in select states. Live betting, black place bets in real time during games. That's FanDuel, the new sponsor for Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. We have an unbelievable show tonight. I want to get right with our guest. Joining me, as he does on most nights, retired NYPD Sergeant, professor at Albertus Magnus College in Connecticut, attorney. Welcome to the show, Professor Mike Geary. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, good evening, William. Good to see you. Thank you for having me on.
Great to have you on. And you know something? Not only am I shocked he's here, but he's also on time. He's all the way from the left coast. He's from California, retired FBI agent. In my opinion, one of the best talking heads on television, because not only can he talk the talk, he can walk the walk. And he's, during all that time he was talking and walking, He got a law degree too. Welcome to the show, retired FBI agent Bobby Chacon. Welcome, Bobby.
Hi, boss. Hi, Professor. How are you?
Good to see you,
guys
Bobby.
again. Good to
Bobby,
see you guys.
those new glasses, and something happened to your eyes or what?
They're just the readers. I've been reading all day. I got a
Oh, okay. I didn't mean to goof on your glasses.
No. I'm glad you said on time because I was actually a little late tonight, even tonight. And the last time I have to apologize, I was a no-show because things have been a little crazy. And my wife is working she was working in Africa all of July, and now she's in China all of August. So
Wow.
I'm here with these two monsters, and I just had major shoulder surgery. My arm just got out of a sling after about 6 weeks this week. So
Wow.
it's been a little hectic summer here.
So a lot of pizza and a lot of Chinese food.
Degrees every day, so 118 degrees doesn't help.
Oh my God! I said, Bobby, a lot of pizza and a lot of Chinese food because there's no way you're cooking. I know that.
I gained 20 pounds since like March when I had to stop working out because of my shoulder.
Oh
so
God!
The doctor just cleared me that I could get back on a treadmill now, as long as I don't swing the left arm too much. But
good for you.
Yeah, I got 20 pounds loose.
Bobby, I sent you and I sent Mike Mike Geary. The digital footprint has been exposed. Kohberger's cell phone. That article I sent you has some information in it, and it was written in the Independent about what he did on the night or the early morning hours of the murders. And of course, we know that at 02:45 a.m., he turned his cell phone off. And 04:48 hours, he turned it back on. That was after 4 students had been slaughtered, had been murdered. So the premeditation of this that would have been what made him guilty in itself, the circumstantial evidence, but the premeditation of turning off and then turning on the cell phone, he knew exactly what he was doing. Your thoughts, Bobby?
Well, and there's 2 more steps in addition to those that he had to take. So this in the article, it literally, I mean, if you could call it from the horse's mouth, they were quoting 2 experts that were going to be witnesses for the government at the trial. These are prosecution witnesses that are quoted in this article that you sent me. And they said also you have to take your phone, and most people know this kind of now when you get on an airplane, but you have to go in and you have to shut off Wi-Fi, and then you have to shut off the Bluetooth stuff. So, and then you have to shut off the phone, because if you shut off the phone without shutting those 2 things off, it can still be tracked, I guess. So there were like 3 or 4 like buttons that he had to press or things that he had to toggle off, in sequence. And so it's even more of he didn't just bump the phone and it turned off. He had to take certain steps to go into his settings, shut off his Wi-Fi and shut off all that stuff, and then shut the phone off as well. And, we kind of knew some of this very early on in the investigation or early on after his arrest, but now we're getting into the minutia of the details of what you would have heard testified to at trial by these experts. And, the old saying that sometimes silence is the loudest thing. And so where we don't know, I mean, that when he shut that phone off and what happened during that time speaks volumes, even though it's silent, right? Because that's when he would have wanted not to have his phone tracked. And I think they went back all the way as far as they went back at least a year, I think. Maybe you guys can correct me, but he had never. There was only 3 other times that his phone had ever been shut off like that, and just happened to be the night of these brutal murders.
Absolutely. Another thing, Mike. There, you guys both with your law degrees. There's actus reus and there's mens rea. Mens rea is the mental state of mind. Actus is the act. To do all those things is the actus rea, right?
That's right. It's one of the things. Turning off your phone as you're leaving Washington, and it's mysteriously you're turning it back on. And as Bobby said, it's not just you press one button, you got to press 3 or 4 other buttons. That's consciousness of guilt right there. And everything else you've done before and also afterwards, like changing the license plate, that's all consciousness of guilt. That shows your mental state. That shows what you do. Those actions speak louder than words. So those actions show your mental state. We could figure out what he was thinking and why he was doing something from what he was doing.
From this article, I'm going to read a couple of sentences from the first paragraph. At 2:54 a.m. on November 13th, 2022, Brian Kohberger's phone went dark. The battery hadn't died. It wasn't randomly powered off. It was silenced with precision. Wi-Fi and cellular data were disabled. No location tracking on. No background activity. A deliberate blackout during the exact window. Prosecutors say 4 University of Idaho students were brutally murdered at their off-campus home. 2 hours later, at 04:48 a.m., the phone turned back on. It would be months before investigators fully understood what that gap in activity meant. But to the digital forensic experts tasked by prosecutors with retracing Kohberger's steps for evidence to be used against him in his trial, the silence, as you said before, Bobby, spoke volumes. The silence screamed. What we learned is he prepared, according to Heather Barnhart, Senior Director of Forensic Research at Cellbrite, told this newspaper, Barnhart and her colleague Jared Barnhart, head of CX Strategy and Advocacy at Cellbrite, also a digital forensics expert on the case, was slated to testify at Kohberger's trial before he unexpectedly accepted a plea admitting to the November 2022 quadruple murders and receiving life without parole. So they call these digital red flags. And one of the things Mike and I were talking about before we went on the air is that Bill Thompson lied. He absolutely 100% lied, because he said there was no connection digitally and any other way with Kohberger's, or let's call him the perp, the defendant. There was no relation with his digital devices and the 4 victims. And as we know now, according to this article, the Mad Greek restaurant where Kaylee Gonsalves and Madison Mogan worked, his cell phone hit the Wi-Fi in that location. And this, we're just hearing, this was always a rumor, Bobby, but no one ever confirmed it. Your thoughts to that?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the prosecutor here was really splitting hairs, and he was trying to kind of back himself up and like, I mean, he could have said there was a connection. That's up to argument. That's up to debate, whether or not you consider the thing you just said as a connection or not. So the prosecutor, I think, was really trying to kind of, I don't know, he was trying to really split hairs too fine there for me. I think he was trying to justify himself a little bit. And, now it seems like he's trying to weaken his case almost to make his deal look better, because he's getting a lot of heat for the deal that he took.
Yes.
And so I think now he's trying to say things like, well, there was no connection. Well, that would be a question for the jury, first of all. That's a question of fact that, the jury would hear the record, what's put in the record, and they would decide that. So, I think he's trying to like backpedal it a little bit and protect himself. And now he says, because if he says there's no connection, there's no digital connection, no forensic connection, then his deal looks a little better, because like I said, he's taking some heat. I think I see him backpedaling a little bit on some of the statements, because, first that he says there's not, but I mean, we could conclude that there are.
100%. And I had spoken to Mike and other people about this, and I can't even imagine and invent the amount of politics that must have been going on behind the scenes with this case that had nothing to do with the investigation, that had everything to do with the University of Idaho, that had everything to do with the fact that they wanted that case the hell out of Moscow, Idaho, the fact that they wanted to knock that damn house down because they wanted no relation with the university and that house and the memory of 4 students getting slaughtered. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, Bill, just think about it. Besides saying that there was no connection, which, as Bobby said, you're splitting really hairs. We've talked about this when he talked about before, that there was no evidence of him stalking any of the girls. We know that stalking, what he did, may not have been stalking legally under Idaho law, because they weren't really aware that he was stalking them. However, going by their house at 23 times and hitting on the cell tower within 100 feet of their house between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m., to me, is stalking. And I think Madison Mogan at one point even told someone that she thought she was being stalked. And so, he's splitting hairs. And then he said there was no sexual attack or something like that involved in this case whatsoever. And we looked at that, and we know that the attack was probably due to them being pretty girls and him being an incel and having no intimate relationship. That was definitely a sexual attack. Even Dr. Johnson said, you don't have to have an attempted rape for a case like this to be considered a sexual attack. And so they're splitting hairs all over the place on this case. And I think you're right, Bobby. They're trying to say There's not as much circumstantial evidence here. There's not as much circumstantial evidence there, and we're missing some evidence over there. So let's take this plea. 100%.
Absolutely. Shiloh Waltz, thank you so much from Northern New York, from our area. Thank you for the $9.99 super sticker. Very much appreciated. You know, in this article, it says digital silence, a red flag. Now, as more details begin to trickle out through previously sealed police reports and court documents, the team is revealing to this newspaper, The Independent, what they learned about the killer through his digital footprint. The Cellbrite team had uncovered files scrubbed from devices, searches routed through VPNs, and deep downloads about serial killers, all of which they say painted a chilling picture of obsession and planning. While DNA from the knife sheath ultimately tied Kohberger to the crime scene, it was the voids in his otherwise trackable life that revealed how the killings were premeditated, according to experts. Forensic analysis revealed that Kohberger's phone had only 4 periods of total inactivity dating back to June 2022. I think that's what you were referring to before, Bobby. One of those silent moments occurred on the night of the murders. He didn't just lose signal or run out of battery, according to the experts. This was an actual button press, power off on purpose, then a power back on 2 hours later, and in the middle of that, 4 people were killed. So not only, you know, we talk about the actus rea with that, but he also scrubbed his devices. And let's remember, he wasn't arrested. The crime occurred November 13th. He wasn't arrested until December 30th. So a good 6 weeks. So he had 6 weeks to scrub his devices, more than his devices, his car. He got probably cleaned that 40, 50 times. He had enough time to get rid of evidence, to get rid of the murder weapon, to get rid of bloody clothing, to clean his car. I've never heard, no matter how many times someone cleans it, law enforcement not finding some type of forensic evidence inside the car. It seems like they didn't in this case.
Yeah, I think you probably cleaned it pretty well. So you know, when he first was arrested, I made the kind of a snarky remark that if he was going to get his PhD to become like this master killer, he should get his tuition money back. But when you see things like this is probably something he learned in the course of his criminology studies, to shut the phone off. Now, he doesn't realize that, you know, when you don't shut it off for years and then the night of the murder you shut off, there's this 2 hour, you know, blank. He that was pretty stupid, but it's what we call a forensic countermeasure. So it's knowing after the fact that you have to kind of do, or before the fact that you have to kind of do stuff. And so this is his half-hearted attempt at being a master criminal, but it's still, to me, evidence of his premeditation, of his knowledge that he's going to, you know, commit this crime, and he does not want his phone associated with that location. It's the only reasonable explanation to have this once every couple of years event happen the very night of the murder that he's accused of committing. So I think that, you know, and wearing coveralls, forensic countermeasure, because you know, you get old blood on that stuff, you take it off, you dump it. It's one piece of clothing that you have to get rid of, and that's probably what he did. But yeah, I'm sure he probably educated himself. The common person probably can't wash a car that way. But since he was the one thing that probably he was learning is those forensic countermeasures and how to clean a car like that. Because then they started looking at some of his other, you know, you talk about you know, whether or not it was a sexually motivated attack, but then we see some of his computer searches that relate just to that. Right. I can't remember what they were, but some of them were pretty.
There was some really violent porn.
Yes.
That he had.
But also like how to attack a sleeping girl or how to rape a sleeping girl. Like really weird searches that indicate to me that he was probably, you know, a sexual sadist, kind of psychosexual motivated killer.
Right. We discussed that on a whole show with Jim Clementi. And we also discussed it on a show with Dr. Joni Johnson. And then on another show, the great forensic psychologist, Dr. Gary Bricado, he had done a show, I think, with the Interview Room on that exact same topic. I didn't watch it because I don't like to watch anyone's shows if I'm going to do the same topic. I don't want to steal anyone's ideas. But he's a very smart guy. And he laid it all out. And we did the same thing with Jim Clementi. And you know Jim, you're good buddies.
Sure. Good friend of mine.
Dr. Joni Johnson agreed with this. Because when everyone says, We still don't know the motive. No, we know it. We told you what it was, but you don't believe us. The motive was psychosexual. That's what it was. That was his motive.
And I think he went into that room thinking there was going to be a single white female in there. I think he only thought Maddie was going to be in there. And the fact that there was somebody else in there was a bigger struggle. Xana came down the hallway because she heard the commotion. I think all of that upset his plan. We don't really know. Only he knows exactly what his plan was for sure. But we can all, based on our experience and what we've learned from this case, we can make that experience guess that he was probably, driven by a psychosexual motivation. And I think that he thought he'd have more time in the room with Maddie alone. He was wearing coveralls. That's not usually something you'd wear for a sexual attack, but who knows? We don't know his thinking. He's a warped psychopath, obviously. And on the end, at the end, it doesn't really matter, but you don't have to prove motive for the crime of murder in most cases. And so, it's left a chance, but putting the pieces together, I think, based on his computer searches, based on all the other, the totality of the circumstances, as we call it, it leads me to believe that was his motivation.
When I first saw Kohberger after they first arrested him on December 30th, I couldn't help but think of look at this geek. He's a geek. He's an absolute geek. What, this guy really murdered these 4 students? He doesn't seem capable of, of walking and chewing gum at the same time. But yet then you see him in court with that 1,000-yard Vietnam stare, we used to call it, right? Just his eyes, like the eyes of a shark, no feeling, no life in them. And then with his answers, just one word, 3-letter word, yes, yes, yes. And he should have never been allowed to answer that. I believe he should have been forced to allocute, and as part of the deal that the government cut for themselves was a horrible deal. All they got was the plea, and they got no information for it. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, Bill, although he doesn't look like much, he doesn't look like, some sort of Terminator figure. You think of the BTK killer, Dennis Rader. He's like, I'm probably taller than he is. He's probably about 5'6". He just looks like an accountant, and there he is, committing multiple murders in Wichita, Kansas over the course of 2 decades. And he's a sick, sexually violent wacko, okay, with a family. And so you think he's a family man. He's a Boy Scout leader. He works in the church, his local church. And yet here he is, capable of doing really sick things. I call it the banality of evil, like Adolf Eichmann. He could look like a doctor, but he's capable of doing such sick and evil things that you can't even, imagine anybody that were never even thought about, that anybody even think about. He did it. But this guy, that's who he is. He's such a sick psychopath. And he, in a weird way, he's not like a Terminator who you're scared of when you see this person. He doesn't, he just comes across like on a college campus. Because remember, he's a graduate student. He's walking around Washington State University, and he could be looking for targets in Washington. We're not sure why exactly he picked out, what we believe like Xana and Kaylee or Madison, probably Madison, like you say, Bob. But we don't know why. But he probably, my guess is, he was probably hunting other girls in Washington closer to home, closer to his apartment. But he probably, for some reason, settled on Madison. But this was probably not his only target that fall before he committed the crimes.
As a criminology student in Washington State University, Kohberger had long been immersed in the study of crime. But according to the digital forensics team, his interests crossed a line from academic to obsessive. He didn't just Google these cases. He downloaded full PDFs of case files, not once, but repeatedly. He was downloading detailed reports on serial killers, including Danny Rowling, who also murdered college students using a similar knife. This wasn't casual browsing. This was meticulous research. To determine exactly what happened in that 2 hour on the night of the murders, Cellbrite team recreated the digital environment and studied call logs. Turning off your phone isn't enough according to Cellbrite, you have to disable Wi-Fi, disable cellular, then power down, and that's what he did. They discovered that in the days right before and after the murders, Kohberger disabled Wi-Fi access on his devices and routed his traffic through NordVPN, a tool designed to anonymize online activity. While the act is not criminal, it is abnormal. He was diligent in prep and cleanup, and he made our job really hard, according to Cellbrite. This is someone who tried really hard not to be detected. And the big one right now, his phone had joined the Wi-Fi at the restaurant where two of the victims worked at. But Kohberger failed to do a full cleanup of his phone. Details of what the team found, including scrub files, private browsing, VPN activity, and obsessive downloads about other serial killers, were found hidden deep in his phone, not in a visible gallery or standard folder, but in buried file directories that required forensic tools to uncover. He had also downloaded reports on the Idaho murders and extensive searches of the victims. So we were told that didn't exist. We were told by DA Thompson that there was no connection. Why did he lie?
Well, I think he lied to try, because I think he lied to make this deal look better. But he was saying some of the stuff even before the deal, unfortunately. But certainly after the deal, I think he was trying to, as odd as it sounds, he was trying to damage his own case so it makes the deal look better. The weaker the government's case, the better the deal looks. So for him, making his case look weaker now actually makes his deal look better. The fact that he cut that deal better, and obviously he's been taking some heat for that deal. And so I think that's his motivation. Why? That's his why.
I think that it makes the government look really stupid. I think, and I wasn't against the plea because I think the death penalty is somewhat obsolete these days when people that get it have 25, 30 years to do appeals before they even if they get it, they may never get it anyway. So it's a lose-lose for the government in a way. The only good thing it's good for is as a negotiating chip. And in both cases that we had covered, this case, the Idaho 4 and Stefan Stearns, the death penalty worked in the favor of the prosecution. They both took pleas because they were afraid of that. In this case, the firing squad. In the case of Stefan Stearns, it would have been the needle. So in that way, yes, it's a negotiating tool, but other than that, I don't really think it's that effective. Mike?
Yeah, Bill, you got to look at it. I understand, and you and I have talked this over a lot. I'm glad he admitted it. I'm glad he's now in prison. Prisoner 163214 is in prison forever. We don't even have to think about him. Now his memory's dying out in the media. That's a great thing. But as much as I dislike the death penalty, for a lot of reasons, I think it's good to have it because you could hold it over someone's head like the sword of Damocles, and you could execute him if you had to. But the thing is, every state, I think there's 27 states that still have the death penalty. There are mandatory state appeals that are going to happen, even if he doesn't ask for an appeal. It's going to happen. He doesn't have to file a notice of appeal. It's going to be appealed. And then there's discretionary appeals. He'll look for a case, habeas corpus petition in the local district court, try to get himself into district court. And then he'll go to the circuit court if he's denied in the district court. It's going to be going on for 25 years, perhaps. At that point, if he's about 30 now, 32 now, he's going to be, it's going to be 1995 or something. I mean, it's going to be insane amount of time by the time they even get to execute him. I mean, and I wouldn't, lose a bit of sleep over him being executed. But the thing is, it's good for negotiation. Look at New York. We haven't executed somebody since 1963. Okay. That's before the Beatles came to America. That's
so the year I was born.
Yeah. Eddie Lee Mays was put to death in the electric chair in Sing Sing. That's how long ago it was. It's just incredible. I was in diapers at that time, but it's good to have it in your back pocket. And so whatever you can get out of it, you and you and I think that he should have been tried, but there's always the possibility that this one Kohberger slips into that jury pool and says, I don't know. you know. And
I
then,
wasn't I didn't object to the deal either. I would have liked to see it go to trial. I would have liked to
yeah,
see him get the death penalty, but I immediately and automatically thought that, oh, good. Now we're going to make him stand up in court and say exactly what he did and why he did it.
exactly.
And that's a subject of negotiation. The government doesn't have to accept his plea if it does. It's a negotiation. That's why it's called a deal. Each side negotiates. And if the government just would have put it to him and say, look, there is no deal. We're not going to offer you a deal unless you do this. You agree to allocate. You to stand up on the record and say this, this, and this. Tell us what you did with the murder weapon. Tell us what you did with the clothes you're wearing. All of this stuff was subject to negotiation. Why, if you look at the things that each side had, the government got nothing other than the plea itself. And guess what? When I say they can't force him to make a plea, he could plead guilty to the charges. Like he could flat out plead. The government can't stop him from doing that. But that would have subjected him to the death penalty, obviously. Maybe he would have got it. Maybe he wouldn't. There's no guarantee he'd get it either. So I think that in looking back, the reason I was not really mad about the deal was that I thought automatically, because in the pleas that I've taken, you make them stand up there in court, allocate to exactly what you did, sometimes why you did it, and you hear from the person, and then I'm hearing a lot. Well, he would have lied. He would have lied. But you can independently corroborate some of the things that he says. If he would have said where the knife was, he would have probably said the truth. But we could have went out and searched for it. It could have given us leads or whatever. So I'm very disappointed. I'm not disappointed when the deal was made. I'm disappointed that the government didn't get more out of the deal because I thought they had a stronger hand in negotiating that deal.
100%. I was talking to Mike off the air before you came on, and we were talking about if you had to prosecute this case, right? And after opening statements, so the opening statements are done, where do you start, Bobby? Where would you exactly start?
I mean, that's an interesting. There's different schools of thought with the prosecutors I work with. Sometimes they like to tell a sequential narrative story chronologically. So, you start basically a timeline. Some prosecutors like to put their strongest evidence in first to get the jury going, boom. So like you get the defense back on its heels. You put your strongest piece of evidence in first. And then some prosecutors like to wait until the end to use their strongest evidence. So it really depends on your prosecutorial theory and you talk about that with your team, with your investigators, your detectives, with your other prosecutors who are going to second seat you on it. And so I think you discuss that and you say, how are we going to tell the jury the story, so it makes sense to them and we get them, the strongest evidence that really makes an impact on them. So it would depend on all of those things. And I wasn't privy to, you basically put it up on this huge whiteboard in your war room as you prep for trial and you say, this is how we're going to approach it. But, I mean, obviously in movies and TV, usually they do the chronological. They start from the beginning and they go through a timeline of what happened. That's not always the way you don't have to do it that way. But that's usually the way they do it.
Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, Bill, I'm agreeing with Bobby a lot. I'm always thinking, well, you start off with a 911 call. That's how in the NYPD, the cases I was on, you start the 911 call. Who are you? 46 Sector Adam, police officer Mike Geary. We went to 183rd Street and Crescent Avenue, call of shots fired, whatever it happened to be. And you just do it that way. But after talking with you, Billy, and looking at everything over, I think, and actually even looking at this report that you put up there, I think it's really good to start off with his phone activity. Get an expert, not like Dylan Mortensen up there and having her be traumatized, being the first person that the jury sees, but having a calm, cool, collected veteran person talking about the cell phone data, about his habits. And then talking about what does the cell phone data give us before and during that day? Why was the cell phone turned off? How was it turned off? How was it turned back on? And how different that is from other days in his life. And then I would do the Elantra video, because this way you're getting a lot of that technical stuff in. You do the Elantra video, watching it go around in circles in the neighborhood and tear-assing out of there at exactly 4:20 or something like that in the morning.
4:48.
4:48.
That's when the car. That's
right.
when he turned his cell phone back on. I'm sorry.
That's right. and then I would do Dylan Mortensen and the 911 call, and then I'd have the cops testify about what they saw, and then I would hit them with the DNA. And so I think that would make, in my point of view, if I could set this case up as an assistant to the district attorney, if I was second seating him, that's what I would suggest.
I know I'm just a lowly police sergeant without a law degree like you two guys. So, but I also have an opinion on this, and I think that if you went to the sledgehammer, which was the DNA on the button of the knife sheath, and the jury's not impressed with it, you have nowhere to go. And I think of the force compendium. Remember that, Bobby?
Mm-hmm.
Where if you started with too much force, where are you going to go after that if it didn't work?
Right.
So you start out speaking very softly, and then you get a little louder, and then you build it up. Same thing with this. As I said, if you go to the sledgehammer, you go to the bazooka, and it doesn't work. How are you going to go? And you have so much.
Yeah, and there's also the thought that, like, the knife sheath, that's going to be kind of debated. The defense is going to have their experts come in. So it's nice to kind of start building your story and your narrative with evidence that can't be really challenged. That's dry. It may seem boring, but it's going to set that strong foundation that the defense isn't really going to be able to challenge. It's scientific. When like I was a juror on a 5.5-month murder trial, as I've said before here, and a lot of that, in fact, weeks, maybe 3 or 4 weeks of that, were people from Cellbrite, people from the FBI's computer response team coming in the court. Look, as an FBI agent juror, it was very odd watching another FBI agent testify, and I have to kind of judge his ability as a witness. But a lot of it was testimony on cell phones. I came in I'm like you guys. When I came in the FBI, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have pagers, and so I'm not really up on a lot of that stuff. I would come home after a day of testimony on all these experts, and my head would be spinning. But I learned a lot about what they can do with cell phones and texts, and when something's deleted and how it can be brought back and things like that. And so I think you put the stuff that really isn't going to be challenged so much, and then the jury already has kind of a certain like little hill that they're standing on of evidence that's not really challengeable, that on cross the defense really doesn't make a whole lot of points. And so now the jury's like on your side because you've got an amount, and then you start introducing the evidence that might be more challenged by the defense. So you get that little bit of a foundation laid where the defense really can't touch your experts just because of the nature of the evidence. And so you get that information in without it really being too damaged on cross, and then the jury is already on your side, and then you're just giving them more and more and more.
Very cool. Folks, FanDuel is now a advertiser, a sponsor of the Police Off the Cuff podcast on the Believe Network. FanDuel, an American gambling company, offers sportsbook, daily fantasy sports, horse racing, and online casino services. Founded in Edinburgh, Scotland in 2009, it began as the news prediction site HubDub before transitioning to its current services. FanDuel is partnered with the NFL, NBA, WNBA, Major League Baseball, NHL, and PGA Tour, and operates FanDuel Racing and FanDuel Face Off. I'll learn how to talk one of these days. Anyway, FanDuel, the new sponsor of Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. It's I want to actually play another thing that's became sort of controversial, but because it's so out there now and it's such great evidence, and we weren't really apprised of this, that the prosecution had this till they had to admit that they had it.
For the first time, photos from inside that off-campus home where convicted killer Brian Kohberger committed those grisly crimes. The nearly 200 images of the crime scene now obtained from the Moscow Police Department through a public records request by NBC News affiliate KTVB. Many of the disturbing photos redacted or blurred by authorities, but they shed light on the since-demolished King Road house where Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin were killed back in 2022.
Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty?
Yes.
The last vestiges of a typical college home, an open front entrance with a wreath hanging on the door, a living room with a backpack and red plastic cups scattered on the floor, Photos of staircases, a bedroom, and bathroom where an investigator's reflection is seen in the mirror. But the images also show signs of the attack, including blood spots on a hardwood floor. And this is the glass door that police believe Kohberger opened to enter that home.
The person that slithered through that sliding glass door now stands before the world and this court unmasked.
Kohberger seen in this previously released photo moments after his arrest. And police also now releasing this video taken from a neighbor's porch in the early hours the morning of the murders. A white car captured speeding away. With his trial just weeks away, last month, Kohberger pleaded guilty to all 4 murders to avoid the death penalty. But the victims' families had one last opportunity to confront him. Kaylee Gonsalves' sister, Olivia, delivering one of several emotional statements during his sentencing.
You're a delusional, pathetic, hypochondriac loser who thought you were so much smarter than everybody else.
The families now carrying on the memories of the 4 lives lost.
I mean, everything about Kaylee was amazing.
She was going to light the world on fire, and we're missing her. You know, we're missing her.
Yeah. So, all we were talking about the other night, all of these crime scene photos, and I've never seen in my entire police career, police departments release crime scene photos. Never, ever, ever. And I don't know. I know the Freedom of Information Act, we used to call it FOIL, Freedom of Information Law. It gives a lot of power to the broadcast media, to the journalists to get these items, but it's none of their business to get them. These are horrific photographs. Why do you think you have the right to receive them?
Yeah, I wasn't really a big fan of releasing them. I know the public these days has this insatiable appetite for true crime stuff, and I really wasn't a big fan. I didn't care to see them. I didn't want to see them. I didn't think it would add anything to our knowledge of the case. And I also know how cruel the internet could be and how it lasts forever. And these pictures are going to wind up in memes and live on because there's just ignorant, stupid, cruel people out there on the internet, and they'll use them. And it's just I didn't think the public benefit outweighed the rights of the families not to have to go through that. And I think that the better course of action would have been to request the judge to put them under a permanent seal.
I agree with you. Mike, what are your thoughts?
100%. I agree with Bobby. It doesn't add to the public's understanding. If it's one thing, if you want to release some, we saw this with the case in Florida with poor Matty Soto and Stefan Stearns. Some interviews, some DD5, what you call it in the NYPD, the DD5 follow-ups, things like that. That's one thing. If the public wants to read about certain things, fine. It'll be very clinical, but to show the photographs, I think is a horrific disservice to the privacy of the families and also of the victims. You and I have seen, and all 3 of us have seen terrible crime scene photos. Many of them, there's nothing to be gained. This is the kind of stuff that would give people nightmares, and it's voyeuristic and it's disgusting, and it has no place outside the courtroom where the defense attorney, prosecutor, jurors, and judge see it, and that's it. And then it should be sealed, and nothing further should ever be done with them. Opening it up, as Bobby said, it'll be there forever. I mean, we could see some people are putting up photographs of just some blood spatter pattern, but if any of the other more horrifically graphic pictures get put up there, this is the kind of stuff that could also, and I think one of the viewers said this recently, is it could spur other people to be kind of like a copycat because they'll read about this, they'll see it in living color. It's going to stimulate people because we think one of the people who stimulated Kohberger was the guy from the Florida case, the Gainesville Ripper, called Danny Rawlings. All this stuff can stimulate people's imagination. And if you're a sick puppy to begin with, this can add fuel to the fire. It's a terrible thing to do.
100%. I want to play a little bit of this. They were trying to connect Kohberger to a case that happened approximately a year before. Let me play this.
Information to share with you about Brian Kohberger. We're learning that police investigated the convicted killer for an eerily similar break-in a year before the Idaho student murders. The incident happening back in October of 2021 in Pullman, Washington, the same weekend that Washington State University's criminology department was hosting an event for incoming students. The location of the break-in just 10 miles away from the Idaho 4 murders. Now, like the Idaho student murders, this was an attack that happened in the middle of the night at an off-campus home where 4 college females were living. The intruder wore a ski mask and had a knife when he broke into the residence. Both Kohberger and that suspect in that case entered the residence through an unlocked back door. The suspect in this unsolved case positioned himself at the foot of the bed, unaware that the female was awake, at which point the female kicked him and kicked him hard, good for her, in the stomach, and then he fled the scene. Boy, oh boy, this sounds familiar, doesn't it? We do know that Killer Kohberger's investigation was brief, and it was shut down when police learned that there was no record of him attending school events or being near the area at the time. But it does make you wonder, was there a possible pattern with this guy? Let's bring in our expert guests and talk about this. Criminology expert, author, and professor at St. Thomas University, Dr. Debbie Goodman is with us, and criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Michael J. Brown is with us as well. Good morning to you both. Dr. Debbie, do you think this could have been Brian Kohberger?
100%, Julie. The fact patterns are so similar, and as you suggest, eerily so. And there's just no coincidence, Julie, when it comes to murder. These individuals, meaning serial and mass murderers, they're very consistent with their patterns. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. We always start there. So as you said at the introduction, the victimology pattern is very similar. We have a young female college student in her bedroom at or near 3:30 a.m., encounters this intruder with a knife, and we know the fact pattern at 1122 King Road. I feel very strongly that this individual was at both places, and it's pretty consistent, Julie, even as we look at other high-profile individuals of this classification, you know, the Bundys, the Dahmers, Rader, Gacy. At some point, they have participated in what they all think will be the perfect murder, but something gets thwarted, something doesn't go well. So now they vacillate between panic and perfection in their minds. They want the crime to be perfect, but in so doing, and thankfully this young lady was so brave and bold to have kicked him and disrupted him and ultimately saved her life.
Oh, you're so right. Boy, I love.
So, you know, I always like MO. MO to me is a huge thing. And this fits the MO, but however, he's wearing a mask. He can't be identified. I don't believe he left behind DNA or left behind fingerprints or anything like that. But surely the modus operandi fits. And you know, that someone in the chat was saying, oh, this guy was 5'6", 5'7". Don't believe any of the bullshit about how tall someone was in a dark room. No one could tell exactly how tall someone is. I remember one time we had a guy in a lineup who was 6'6", and we had fillers that were like 5'8". And people didn't notice that this guy was 6'6" when he stood up. You know, it's like, it's crazy. But so no, as far as MO, could this be him? Yeah, but is there any way they could even prosecute this? No. Bobby, your thoughts?
It has nothing to do with him. It wasn't him. I think this is what happens with these cases. You know, I respect Dr. Debbie, but like, she's completely wrong on this. This was just a matter of the Pullman police wanting to leave no stone unturned. They knew they had this. It was similar. It wasn't the exact same fact pattern. But if you want to go through every break-in of every ski mask guy that breaks into a girl's apartment across the country, of course, I'm sure it happens, if not hundreds of times, dozens of times a year. You have similar things. This is not an uncommon type of attack on a college campus. You know, I think it happens all the time. I think a lot of times it goes unreported. A lot of times it ends with the campus police. It doesn't even make it to the local police. So this drives me crazy. Had nothing to do with him. And you know, he did attend that orientation, but he attended it with his father via Zoom. He wasn't in the state when it happened. He was across the country in Pennsylvania, and he attended via Zoom, and that's what their investigation determined. The guy was the witnesses were says 5'2" to 5'5", and I agree. Sometimes that doesn't matter, but when you put it together with the guy wasn't even in that part of the country, and that this kind of attack is probably common on college campuses. Unfortunately, I don't say that with any pleasure, but we know rape on college campuses and break-ins on college campuses are common. And I just think this is probably one of those things that was out there and people are going to feed on it. It was a year before he ever got moved to the state. There was no reason that he would ever have carried out this attack. If he did previous attacks, he did it in Pennsylvania, or that's where they should have been looking. He had the work IDs of two former female colleagues in Pennsylvania, so he was doing creepy stuff back there in Pennsylvania. So I would look at those cases a lot stronger. This is one of those things that was, they looked at it, good for them. They were trying to be thorough, and they said, nope, this is not connected. They did a really good investigation on it, and they put it to rest. But for people now to pick this thing up and say, for somebody that claims to be an expert to say this was definitely him, I think that's completely irresponsible. I think this is, if you're going to do that, then you get me the reports of every ski mask break-in on every college campus during those 3 years or 4 year period, and I bet you're going to come up in the hundreds of cases.
Bobby, I think the only way we're going to find out if Kohberger or if Rex Heuermann, the Gilgo Beach killer, if they did additional murders, is if they confess to it. Mm-hmm. Because at this point, especially the Gilgo Beach murderer, it goes back to 1993. I'm sure he's done way more than they know about, more than the 7 he's being charged with now.
I'm sure they were down in North Carolina. There's probably some victims there, wherever he's got that property. Yeah, I agree with you, but he had a much longer run.
Yes,
much longer,
of course.
Body of work, if you will, to look at. I think that, I worked the Israel Keys case, the serial killer in 2011, and his first attack was I think he was about 18 or 19 years old, and he left the victim alive. He raped her and he left her alive because she got inside his head. She started talking to him, "You're a good-looking guy. You shouldn't do this. Why you?" And he left. But when he left, he realized he tried to go back and get her, and she was gone. And he felt like he was always looking over his shoulder after that because he left a live witness, and he promised himself he would never leave another live witness, and he didn't. And we know of at least 11 that he admitted to, including the young girl that I recovered, his last victim, and my dive team and I recovered her. But he learned, so he was kind of maturing and evolving, as we sometimes see killers do. We don't know if Kohberger. It's my opinion, and just opinion. I could totally be wrong. It's my opinion these were probably his first murders, but maybe not his first attacks. And maybe he was evolving into a murderer. He was doing smaller break-ins, maybe like the case we just talked about, but not that particular one. Maybe, and we've seen that they break in and they get the thrill of standing in someone's room while they're sleeping, and then they leave because they lose their nerve to actually. But this time, and why he's driving around 3, 4, 5, 6 times that night is he's in that car trying to get his nerve up, his adrenaline. He's trying to get his adrenaline to it's flowing, and once it gets that certain level, then he's going to be able to go in there and carry out the attack. And so, like I said, I could be wrong. I think he was an evolving person to do these crimes, and he probably, if he wasn't caught in this one, he probably would have done more.
Absolutely. Let me play this.
The University of Idaho murders case from some of these documents that have just been unsealed. In them, we actually have learned some of the testimony from 2 of the surviving roommates, and both of them told investigators that in the weeks before the murders, Kaylee Gonzalez at one point had thought that there may have been someone that was following her, and in another instance when she was out with her dog, that there may have been somebody staring at her that she saw, to the point where she was telling everybody about it and had asked her roommates if they were going to come home soon. We've also learned some gruesome, sad details about the murder scene, including that Kaylee Gonzalez's face was disfigured from the attack, and that Xana Kernodle had more than 50 stab wounds. Also, Brian Kohberger apparently had scratch marks on his face in November of 2022, the month of the murders.
See, a lot of this stuff was all rumored, and then when people tried to get verification, they slapped that gag order, and we never found out. And there were rumors that Kaylee Gonzalez was being stalked or being followed. that's important information, and it's coming out now. I mean, Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, Bill, this guy is creepy. We know now, of course, that he had IDs that they found in his Washington University apartment. He in a shoe or something. He had 2 IDs from people that he'd worked with in a school district in Pennsylvania. Bobby's right. He's building up to something. He would have attacked someone, but you're right. He probably enjoyed, like a voyeuristic thing, going into somebody's office, taking something, looking through their drawers, looking through their personal things. And he's building up and up and up and up. But we heard a lot more, and some of the things we discounted, but some of the things we heard made a lot of sense. And the idea about, Kaylee thinking that she was being stalked, and although it may not officially be stalking under Idaho law, this is where I digress with Bill Thompson. This is stalking behavior, and why he would say that is just ridiculous. But there was a lot of stuff a lot of rumors that were actually verified to be true, and sadly, it kind of, in some ways, unfortunately, set the internet on fire, where you had a lot of content creators going absolutely bonkers, coming up with all kinds of wild theories. And so it kind of didn't work out the way they thought it would. But they weren't candid anywhere during the process from 2022, early 2023 to the present day, when the gag order was in place.
One of the things, though, when I hear district attorneys making comments that should be made by the police, I give them no credence whatsoever. They're not cops. They don't know what they're talking about for the most part. They talk about it. They look at it from the perspective of a lawyer, a prosecutor. They have no idea about police work. Even when they say they don't know what the motive is. Really, Bill Thompson, go read a couple of books on psychosexual murderers, and maybe you'd understand. How could you just come out, be not assistant district attorney, the district attorney, and come out with something that's stupid? It's baffling to me. You going to comment on this, Bobby? You're going to
Oh, me? You throwing it to me? I mean, look, I think he was in over his head from the beginning on this. He's a small county prosecutor. I don't know if he's ever handled anything this big. I mean, these cases seem to get bigger each one, but I just think he was in over his head. The big cities have the advantage of having PIOs, or public information officers, even in the DA's offices and U.S. attorney's offices, and they're more media savvy people and things like that. And I think the best course of action in that case is not to say anything at all. Don't say there is no motive. Just don't say anything. Right. You're not required to brief the public unless the public's safety is at issue. And once you've determined that it is not, then just keep your mouth shut. First of all, is there a gag order? Or that's how you're going to get a gag order, if you talk, too much out of the side of your mouth. So, I mean, I don't think there's any benefit. And certainly there's a lot of downside to it, because you could create an issue if it goes to trial, and you could create an appellate issue. And then you could come off just looking bad. So the better course is just to defer. If you want to defer to the police department, I've seen that happen. I've seen, the police department defer things to if it's a legal question, defer to the DA's office. The DA can defer it to the police office. And in that case, you can kind of use each other as kind of a, go ask them kind of thing. And then it avoids you getting on the public record.
What, Bobby,
something that you're going to regret later on.
Messaging is so important. I was covering that shooting in Atlanta on that college campus where the police officer lost his life, and the press conference they did was horrific. It was horrible. I mean, horrible. I was like, they wouldn't say that the cop was shot dead. They wouldn't give the name of the perp. They had no timeline whatsoever. They couldn't give answers as to where the shooting actually took place. It was, don't even do the press conference if you're going to do such the mayor seemed like he was just, posing for animal crackers. He just wanted mic time, and it was just like, don't do a press conference if it's going to be that horrific.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen it. It happens every couple of cases. I mean, we had an FBI agent manager say something wasn't terrorism when it clearly was terrorism. Remember that last
That
year?
was in New
I think.
Orleans.
Yeah,
That was
New
in New
Orleans, right?
Orleans. Yes.
She gets something, and then 3 days later, I think she found herself transferred or something. But you know, like
she was working in Staten Island.
You wonder how people like that find themselves, in front of a microphone and stuff. But like, at least the FBI, I know, like the higher bosses, they all get media training, and then like the bigger offices have, we have like civilian media people on staff in the office. They work for the FBI. They're not agents, but they're professional, what we call professional staff, and they're media people, and so they're savvy and they know how to handle it. And all of our bosses get that media training, probably just like the NYPD and LAPD. You get that media training, and because a lot of times you don't get promoted based on how well you talk. You get hopefully you get promoted on how well you do the job. Well, how well you do the job doesn't always equate to being able to stand in front of a camera and articulate certain issues and things like that. So you get people that are really good at what they did, but they're not necessarily good at messaging. And so you're trying to hopefully give them the help that they need. That's why the whole PIO exists. That's why that position exists, right?
Yes.
Because you need somebody to kind of be aware of that stuff. Because messaging is important because, and it's important because the public has to have the faith and confidence that you can do the job. And unfortunately, we judge everybody by how good they look on camera, how articulate they are, how they can, articulate an issue and things like that. And we think if they can't, then they can't do the job. That's not necessarily true. Those are two different skill sets. You can have a great detective who knows his stuff and can investigate any crime, but he just can't stand before a camera and articulate what he needs to. Now, that's two different skill sets. Sometimes people have both, but sometimes they have one or the other. And, and that's what people should remember. And when you have somebody that doesn't have that skill set, then somebody should be there to kind of manage them. So
take the reins. Take the reins and get, and the most important thing is that they keep repeating. We want everyone to know that these what we're telling you right now is preliminary and subject to change, because this is what we know right now, and it could change. Because all investigations, if you want accurate information, you have to wait. But no one wants to wait. Everyone wants the information a half hour ago. So it's not always going to be accurate when you're rushing the information out there. And I remember when this case first occurred, the mayor was the damn information. They were like, what is he doing? Right. Shut up, mayor. Go to City Hall and go eat a hoagie or something. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And it was the worst information we got during this whole case. And then finally someone must have said, don't do this anymore. First of all, it's not your business. It's the police department and the district attorney's office, not the mayor, Crazy. But, the other thing was coming out with a lot of the evidence that they were, the photos. That was, we were debating on that the other day.
And it's good to know that, as you said, that the families seem to be on the same page with this. I mean, there is this argument out there, putting aside crime scene photos. The public wants to know as much as possible about why these children were killed. And the question becomes, do you think the public has a right to know all the details of the case? Again, putting aside the crime scene photos, do you think the public has a right to know all of this?
I think the public should demand that 100%. Sometimes the courtroom doesn't realize that there is no courtroom without victims, and they need to represent them people and the community. The community has the right to know that they're arresting the right people and the punishment is correct. And I think that, the prosecution here purposely hid the facts of what happened to these kids to try to get all the parents to be in silos and not unite and force them to do the right thing, force them to have, a capital case. They never had that. That's why they didn't tell the kids what really happened to our kids. They hid that from us because they knew that could be a rallying cry for all the parents to get on the same page.
And I want to talk about that in a minute, and as well as Bill Thompson and current statements he's making. But, Steve, when I look at you, I interview victims' family members all the time. And you think about what they have to go through when the crime first happens, what they have to go through when there is a trial, what they have to go through the grieving process for the rest of their lives. But you're in this unfortunately unique position where this case has been amplified. And I wonder for you, how difficult is it knowing that you are going to have to deal with these document releases for months that the story doesn't end with Kohberger getting shipped away, that now it's about the release of information and trying to protect your daughter and the other victims. Well, how difficult is it?
We have to do it better. They could have easily done better than this. This trickle effect of, I mean, the case is over. Let it out. Stand by what your decisions are, and the information come out. I know you have to give a little bit of time for sealing, but it's called control, find, replace. We do it at work all the time. It's not a big deal. We can replace. We can get through these docs real easy. So yeah. I think they got to do a better job. And this trickle thing's been going on the whole time. And it was torture. It was absolute torture for the families. And they kind of wore us all down. And that's kind of the strategy that, we knew that the defense was going to do, was to try to push this out, try to make it as far away from our homes, try to make it as inconvenient as possible. And, they had success for that. And in the end, they were rewarded.
Just to clarify something, how has communication been with the prosecutor's office regarding document releases?
Once the plea was in, we haven't heard anything. So, and they basically told us when we wanted to get all the discovery that we'd have to go through the state and we'd have to go through the federal FOIA request. They weren't going to help us in any way. They did actually help us with one. They did help us with the death certificate, the autopsy. They gave us that. That was given to us on a thumb drive. But other than that, we have to go through the official channels like everyone else. And when you guys are hearing about it, you're hearing about it before we are.
That is disgusting. I'm saying that in my opinion, that is so terrible. And by the way, so we're talking about the prosecution. So Bill Thompson has been speaking out about the case. A, what do you make of that? And B, do you agree with this theory that he's put out that Brian Kohberger broke into the house before the murders?
Yeah, we spoke with some FBI profilers, and that's where we kind of came to the conclusion that this person had been looking at this house and had probably tested that back slider and had probably been in that house multiple times, and maybe even like attempted to hide in a closet. Those type of behavior patterns they explained to us. So yeah, we'd known about that, and they thought maybe possibly this individual brought a kill kit, some things to go in there, because anybody who goes into a house and goes through those scenarios is going to be very well planned. And there's a little tree line out there. He could have put some of those things like a backpack or some mitigating things like plastic, some other type of things. He could have left them out there, slid in. I mean, he even wrote about how he would prevent a crime scene from being contaminated. So you can anticipate that those same things he wrote about are things that he actually did in that crime scene. And I think he intimidated the prosecution, and they were a little bit scared to have to go to bat against him. So they took the easy way out.
It's amazing to me, and I don't agree a lot of times with Steve Gonsalves, but I respect the man. I mean, just what he's been through, what his family's been through, what all these parents have been through. All of us here, well, you're not a parent, right, Bobby? You
No.
have kids? Well, Mike and I have kids, and we can understand. I mean, you can understand, but you could obviously never ever fully understand what he's gone through in the past 2.5 years. Just absolutely horrific. So I admire this man, and again, I don't agree with him all the time. I even hear where he said, I think the public should get everything they want. I was a little bit shocked that he said that. You would think he would want the reverse, because one of the victims is his child,
I don't think he'd have that same opinion if the prosecutor would have kept the family abreast of all the developments in the investigation on a regular basis, would have had either Zoom calls or bring them in personally periodically and let them know what's happening. But the fact that he and the other families have to find out some of these things when a reporter calls them for comment or when they see it on TV is horrendous. That's really bad practice. And so I think he may not still agree with the plea, but I think he would be less likely to want, to say everything should go out, because he wasn't given anything. So of course he's now going to say, hey, push everything out there. But I think that there needs to be more of a procedure, and we do have them in bigger cities. Again, I think this jurisdiction was in over its head a little bit with the publicity going on in here. But they really should have done a better job at communicating with the families and the victims' families, and and periodically bring them in. Here's where we're at. You can even basically sign them up to, like, whatever we tell you, you can't go out and tell the press, kind of thing.
Right.
You'll be under the same gag order that we are, kind of, but we're going to let you know every step of the way what's going on. And they apparently didn't do that. And so when you hear that bitterness in his voice, you hear him say how they tried to, there was a strategy for the defense, the prosecution, to kind of deal with the families. And I think that, that's really poor practice. I think that the families would be much more, or much less traumatized, if you will, if they would have been kind of more of the part of the process.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, you could see he's been through the mill with this whole situation here. Guys, I was the first thing what I had heard, though, about that they believe, or Bill Thompson is putting it out there, that they believe Brian Kohberger had been in that house before the night or the early mornings of the attacks. It's very possible. I don't know how they know that, or they just predicting that based on, the FBI profilers, the BAU, right? The behavioral analysis unit.
I think what he referenced a couple of profilers. They were retired. The ones I know that went to that basically they consulted with them, I think, are two particular that I know, two retired profilers, not Jim Clemente, but other people. Two other profilers that briefed the families, met with the families, and said, but look, we all know profiling is just a guess. It's a guess by very educated and experienced people, but in the end, it's just a guess, right? I mean, profiling is not allowed in court. It's like a polygraph machine. You can use it in your investigation, but it's not admissible in court. And so, and there's a reason for that, is because it's very unscientific. It's a best guess. A lot of it is right on, but some of it's not. And I always. And I have some of my best friends' profiles. I was afraid to use profilers because, if like we've said before, if a profiler comes out with 10 criteria, I arrest my guy and he has 8 of those 10, right? The profilers did a great job. He's got 8 of the 10 of those criteria. Guess what? As an investigator, I'm not tapping anybody on the back, because what's going to happen? I know when I get to trial, the defense is going to seize on those 2 that didn't. They're going to seize on the 2 pieces of criteria that the profiler said this guy would have that my guy doesn't have. And that's what they're going to focus on. That's what going to drill into the jury, right? They're going to get the 2 that didn't match. And so I was always a little worried about profiling in that respect, because it's never 100%. But the 90% they get right, or the 80%, guess what? That leaves 20 or 10% that the defense is going to make the whole case about.
Bobby, I always the most accurate one I've ever seen was Jim Clemente, his profile of Rex Heuermann. That was 10 years before he was arrested, and it was like exact. And then one of the worst ones ever was the Beltway sniper.
Oh, yeah.
The Beltway sniper is a male white in his late 30s, early 40s, and we know he was a male black 17. That was like,
well, but Jim did that one too. But Jim said we have 2 killers working together. And he was completely dismissed by the profiling community because they said that's bullshit. There's never been a team of serial killers working together. That's not going to happen. But Jim looked at the case and Jim said, you've got 2 people working together here. And this is why I think that. Jim was retired already. No, he wasn't retired yet. And so Jim actually was the one. He was castigated. He was, he was vilified almost. And then it turned out that Jim's particular profile of that being 2 killers was true. There was not only the 17-year-old, but there was a 40-year-old guy. And Jim said, and most likely these 2 have a mentor-mentee relationship, and most likely that includes some element of sexual abuse or sexual domination. And all of that stuff was true. But you had Chief Moose, run around telling people that it's a white male, the white van, everybody looking for a white van. The white van was a mistake, and so, that was, but Jim's profile on that was dead on. And he got really almost ridiculed at the end. There's never been a team of serial killers.
Well, just
it doesn't work that way.
If people don't know what we're talking about, the shooter was laying down in the trunk of a Chevy and shooting out where the license plate. That's where he was. It was the hole. It was the hole. Where the license plate would be. Yeah.
No, where the key would go. You'd have the key.
Okay, right.
But for those people who are too young to know, we used to have to put a key in to open the trunk, and then that key had a round, mechanism in it. They had popped that mechanism out, and the barrel of the rifle went through that hole, and that's where they were using to shoot.
Malvo and Muhammad.
That's right.
right.
That's right.
And
Right.
one of them got the death penalty. The shooter was 17.
So
And,
he's still in jail. Yeah, he's not. He's still in jail, and the one got executed.
for the rest of his
And
life.
one of the victims was an FBI employee in that case.
No kidding. That was a
Linda
horrible
Franklin.
situation.
Yeah,
I mean, that
she was
really
shot
put
in
the
the parking
whole
lot of a Home Depot.
that put
yeah.
that whole area in just panic for I don't know
Oh
how
yeah,
many months.
yeah.
that
And it was all because he wanted to kill his wife, and he wanted her to be in the middle of this victim pool so that no one would think that she was killed on purpose by her ex-husband. And he was going to kill his wife, but he never got to her. He had killed what, I don't know, 6, 8, 10
Yeah,
people, and then he was going to kill her and then kill a bunch more after that, so that she would be kind of lost in the crowd of victims. And that was his motivation.
Yeah.
Imagine that. I'm going to go out. I want to kill my wife, but I'm going to kill 15 other people, so my wife gets lost in the mix of all these victims. I mean,
Well,
how
you know,
sick of mind do you have to be?
Bobby, even though these active shooters, the guy who goes to New York and he wants to kill someone from the NFL because he thinks he has CTE. What the hell do they have to do with your CTE?
Right.
You played
Right.
football. No one told you. And the NFL, you know, they had nothing to do with you playing football.
And he never got near the NFL. That was kind of a grandiose. He had a grandiose complex of himself. Like he was bigger than he ever was. He never got near the NFL. This guy, he was never. This was look. CTEs that's a real issue. Junior Seau, who played for the San Diego Chargers, you know, when I was living in Long Beach at the time, he killed himself right down the road from me, and he shot himself in the chest, leaving a letter saying, "Please examine my brain because I know something's wrong." And it's tragic. But this guy had one of those grandiose complexes, and he latched himself onto that issue to make himself seem more important to himself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, folks, we hope we gave a pretty good presentation tonight. I'm going to go to Mike first. Mike, your final thoughts?
Bill, I think that the public should realize that, you know, sometimes even in cases like this, where you think that everything's being done, the police are working, you know, even though there's gag order, that everything's is on the level. The only things on the level when it comes to some cases is the water in the toilet, as we used to say in the Bronx. You know, that's it. There's always going to be some sort of angle. And in this case, from day one, there was always that angle of the University, Wisconsin University and the University of, Washington University and Idaho, because there was too much to lose. So we heard crazy stuff from the mayor right from the get-go. The messaging was bad. We've heard they poo-pooed, rumors that turned out to be true. So sadly, the law enforcement was great, but the politics, unfortunately, destroyed a lot of people's confidence in this case.
FBI agent Chacon.
I think we got the right guy. I think he's in jail for the rest of his life. Yeah. He's going to die in jail, hopefully. And, I think that look, I just want to move on. I want the families to move on. I don't want this thing to drag out any more, than it has to. The families have a lot of work to do in healing from this. I mean, you never, ever, ever can get over something like this. But, it's not always time and distance from the event, because now with the internet, we extend that time because we keep having people say these stupid theories. These people think Kohberger's innocent, or they'll look at these crime scene photos and say, well, that doesn't make sense. What if this and what if that? Right. I think that, look, have an ounce of sympathy for the families and empathy for what they're going through, and just, hold your tongue maybe. I mean, just don't go out there and like, I hope, every time I appear for this case, I hope it's the last time, because I just think the families don't get well served by keeping this thing alive, and hopefully he'll disappear into oblivion. I hope that there's some unscrupulous producer out there already contacting his lawyers, trying to get an interview with him and stuff. And
Bobby, I was talking about that the other day. Who's going to be the first writer to go into the Idaho State Prison? Is it going to be Howard Bloom, or is it going to be what's his name? Patterson. Both put out books already. They're knocking on the door of that prison already.
Yeah, I think it's a shame.
Yeah, me too. Folks, I'm Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff. On behalf of myself, Professor Mike Geary, retired FBI agent Bobby Chacon, will all wish Bobby fast healing for his shoulder. I know that's
Thank
a hell
you.
of a
Thanks.
horrible surgery to have. Anyway, have a great night, everyone, and God bless.
Good night.
Thanks.
One episode just ain't enough.